Our next storyteller is the person everybody was taking selfies with up front. So I think we all know Roop Raj. Roop Raj is the 5:30 and 6:30 anchor of the Fox 2 News. Roop's career started at the age 14 when he produced and hosted his own television program in Troy, Michigan. At 19, he was hired at CBS and ABC stations in Lansing, Michigan. He was then hired to anchor the news in Flint, Michigan, followed by 7 years of NBC in New Orleans. After 24 hurricanes, including Katrina, Roop moved to Detroit in 2009, where the economic storm was brewing. Roop is an ardent believer in the city's future, and he says, as a journalist, it's special to be able to cover your hometown. Guys, I want you guys to give it up to a hometown guy, Roop Raj. Roop Raj.
My man. Thank you so much, man. Appreciate it. How are you? I got to tell you, when you hear Scooter say at the beginning of his talk, I heard that Roop was here and how was I going to follow or be on stage with him, he had it backwards. Because I don't know how I'm going to follow that. That was incredible. That is resilience. That is why we're here today. I can only do what you called me here to do today, which was to be a part of something that's bigger than me, and it's bigger than you. When you take every single person here and you add up all of the things that we've done and you put together the stories that you all have and that I have together, we are then one big great story. Individually, our stories are beautiful and great, but each and every one of you has a story of resilience. And as I stand here today, I challenge you to think of one thing and one thing only. And this thought, it always is with me. And it's always proven to be true. And that thought is this: the very thing that holds you back is a thing that can catapult you forward. And when you really think about what that means, it's not just a fancy thing to put on a sticker or something to post on Facebook. There's enough pollution on Facebook. We don't need to be putting out more. But I think about that saying and why it's so special to me. And the reason it's so special to me is very simple. Because there are certain things that I thought of in my life that were going against me, strikes against me, that ended up being the gifts that have catapulted me forward. And as I tell you my story, I hope that you'll think about your own story and the things that have held you back that end up being the very gift to move forward. And we heard from Dave, we heard from our friend Scooter, and my goodness, there's such great stories of resilience. But they don't come easy. These great stories come with challenges. I'm going to tell you this. I grew up in Troy back in the 80s, and I loved watching the news. And every time I turned on the TV, I noticed nobody was on TV that looked like me. You were either, in my world, if you watched local news or national news, you're either black or you're white. And that's it. And as unfair as this world seems on television, it seemed, at least for black people and white people, they were represented. There was no seat at the table for somebody who looked different. And then as we got later into the 80s and maybe the early 90s, we saw Asian women and Indian women who were on television. But again, where were the guys who were brown? The guys who weren't black, weren't white, but were brown. And who grew up in an environment where in Troy, you saw the world. I mean, literally, my high school was like a sandbox that looked like the United Nations. People from Israel and India and Pakistan and the Middle East and everywhere in between, and from Eastern Europe, they were all there. They were all present. And I thought to myself, man, so we have this diverse population, but not one person on television looks like me. So I asked my dad and mom, who came to this country in 1973, what is it about this phenomena that I noticed? And my dad looked at me square in the eye and said, the reason that no one looks like you is because every man and every young man who looks at the television and says, how come no one looks like me? They don't go into it and go do it and make it your story. It's your job to become the guy who looks like you on television. Who are you waiting for? My dad would ask me. And when you grow up in an Indian American household of immigrants who came here in 1973, these guys, my mom and dad, love America. So patriotic, my mom and dad would stand up during the national anthem at home. And my friends, my white and black and Middle Eastern friends, would make fun of my mom and dad because they thought it was so silly. Till this day, my mom, who's 66 years old, my dad, who's 71, still stand during the national anthem in the house. And the reason they do that is because for them, the reason America is such a wonderful place is because their babies, their children, were born here and were able to do anything they wanted to do. And so I will now fast forward and tell you a sentence, and tell me if you agree or disagree. There is no place for an Indian man on TV in New Orleans, Louisiana. While you may disagree today, let me give you the date, and maybe you'll understand where I'm going with this. There is no place for an Indian American in New Orleans 5 months after 9/11. Because New Orleans, Louisiana is way down south. They know black, they know white, they know Creole, and they know Vietnamese. But unfortunately, there's not a lot of room in their minds and space in their souls at the time for someone who looked that different. So my agent called me and he said, you have a choice. This is 2001. He says, you can either go to Milwaukee and be a weekend anchor there. I was 24 years old, or you can go to New Orleans and be a morning anchor there. They really like you. And I went home and I told my parents, and my dad and mom looked at me and said, so you want to go 6 months after 9/11 as a brown guy with black hair with a name like Roop and show up in the deepest part of the South and be the morning anchor? And I said, I'm doing it. I'm taking the dive. And my dad and mom said one thing: don't unpack a bag. They said, because, Troy and Detroit, DTW is not that far. We'll get you on a plane and get you back over here, and you can live with us until you find that other job. They were convinced that I would be canned. So I land in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I start my job as a morning anchor there. I was 25 years old, and I go on TV, and I got to tell you something. 3 advertisers pulled their advertising because they said they don't want to advertise with people who come from the axis of evil. The axis of evil. And I read that. Actually, there's an article in TV Focus, which is like a TV guide, and I read that on a Sunday morning, sitting in my apartment, bags still packed up. And I remember thinking about my dad and mom saying, don't unpack a bag. And I thought, they're right. So 6 months after 9/11, the article says, why did they hire this guy? He's not from here. They didn't mean New Orleans. And I reflected, and I thought to myself, okay, so this is something that is obviously a strike against me, being someone who doesn't look white or black or Creole or Vietnamese. These New Orleans people do not understand that you can be American and look like me. Because to them, American is either white, if they're white, or black, if they're black, and that's it. That's American to them. And it couldn't be more insulting to me because of how much my parents love this country. So I called my father up and I said, Dad, I had no idea that Troy was part of the axis of evil. Could you please explain to me why I didn't know that Troy was part of the axis of evil? And my dad laughed and he said, what happened? And I told him, he said, Roop, and I love my parents so much, and the story of resilience is on their shoulders. They came here, did the hard work. I just was lucky enough to be born and brought up by parents who love this country as much as you do. And when I was growing up, my dad and mom would say, when you go to these areas where people don't know what you look like and they can't put that together and do the math, as my dad would say, it's not because they're bad people. He said, when you've been to India, and I've been to India 3 times now, when you go to those villages, when you walk in, the way your hair is cut, the way your accent is, and the way you talk, they know you're not from India. And how do they treat you? They treat you with curiosity and fear. And so maybe the people of that village in America just don't know you. And maybe it's your job to teach them a little bit about who you are. If you know you're that American, be proud and tell them. So for about 3 months, I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to get fired from this place. I would go out on the streets and people would scream things at me from pickup trucks and cars and yell at me and say, go back to where you came from. I got awful hate mail. Over and over again, I kept thinking, man, this is not a good place for me to be. And I kept in my head hearing my dad say, this is a village, and if they don't know, it's your job as an American, as a fellow American, to teach them. And so the very thing that helped being Indian, I use as a tool to go into speaking engagement circuits like this and others to tell my story. And it was through story that people learned that an American doesn't have to just be white or black, but it can be brown and have a strange name like Roop. They learned, that village did, that I'm as American as they are and that I love this country and would do anything for it if I had to, just like they would. They learned through story that my story is similar to their story. I love the same things about this country as they do. And how dare anybody try to take that away from another American? That is unpatriotic. That is unpatriotic. And so the very thing that set me back is the very thing that catapulted me forward. I stayed there for 3 contracts. Almost 8 years later, we tripled our ratings on the morning show. I couldn't leave my apartment on St. Charles Avenue there in New Orleans without people saying, "Roop, there it is, Roop dog, where you at, Roop?" And I ended up meeting a woman named Julie, who after Katrina, which is a whole different story of resilience, the amazing people of Southeast Louisiana were people of this great country in another unpatriotic fashion would say, "Why do you live there?" which is a very unpatriotic thing to say, because they wonder about the same thing with our 24 snowstorms every year. Why do you live there? Why do they live there? Because they're Americans and that's their home. That's why they live there. And those great Americans in that village called New Orleans adopted this Indian guy as their hometown guy. And I stayed year after year and learned how to cook gumbo and ended up meeting a woman named Julie at a benefit for Children's Hospital about 2 months after Hurricane Katrina. She had never met an Indian man in her life. Blonde hair, blue eyes, black dress, stood in the corner. We looked at each other. She smiled, I smiled. I looked like the shy guy, walked away, got a drink. She came up, we chatted. We've been married for 10 years. And I find it interesting because, you know, it was hard as an Indian guy. Trust me, you have Indian friends or maybe doctors or friends or family. My God, if you marry someone outside of your race, it is like the end of it. Like, I swear I should have just told my parents I am gay. And then 3 months later said, "Okay, just kidding, I'm marrying a white girl." And that would have been somehow better for them. It was so hard to do, but we managed to make it work. And my wife and I, she moved here. She's a Detroiter now and loves the city, by the way. And so we go back to New Orleans often. The thing that I thought was a big strike against me is the thing that catapulted me forward. I'm wearing glasses right now. I wear glasses at home. I wear glasses to go to the Kroger. I go glasses just for that reason. And I often think about glasses because these were the very thing that held me back, I thought, a strike against me when I was a little boy. When I was a little boy, probably about 3 months old, fell down the stairs and I broke my nose and my head and had a hernia. And so they tried to fix me up as well as they could. They stitched my head from here to here. I still have the mark from here to here. And then my nose shattered to the left, so the entire bone went off to the left, and this nostril was bigger than the right nostril. So I had one nostril bigger than the other. And I used to think to myself, my goodness, I just wish I had bad enough eyes to have glasses, because if I wore glasses, it covered up so much of that damage that had been done when I had fallen. The doctor said, "We can't fix your nose until you're 15, because your nose has to grow." So it grew deformed. And mind you, all of this was happening while there was another strike against me. And that strike against me, you probably won't guess it, but I had a speech impediment. I couldn't pronounce my S's or my T's. And I had a broken nose, and my name was Roop, and I was about this much shorter than everybody else in my class. And I used to tell my dad all the time, "Hey, Dad, I still want to be a television anchor." He says, "Well, if Channel 2 won't hire you at 14, that's their fault." And he would, he'd play along. "They're stupid. They're missing out, man. You called Channel 7? I did that. Man, I can't believe they didn't hire you. Son, you need to do something." And this dad, talk about an all-American entrepreneur. He's my first agent. He is my hero. And he is one of the truest Americans I've ever met in my life. He said, "If you can't do it in this country, if you can't, as an Indian American, put that aside and become a television reporter and anchor, you can't do it anywhere. There's no other country where you could do it. So why don't you just try it here?" So I started my own show when I was 14. And when I started my own show, I still had the broken nose for about a year on that cable show in Troy. Very popular show. Lots of people watched it. Very popular. And I was 14 years old, and I'm doing this show. And I had the big glasses on, and it hid my nose. And then when I was 15, the very thing that held me back was the fact that my nose was cracked. I got my nose operated at U of M, and I got contact lenses, and I grew 6 inches that summer. But rewinding that point, the hardest challenge in the world was the fact that I couldn't pronounce my S's and my T's. Until this day, I kid you not, I have to really concentrate when I say certain words when I'm on television, because that will come back sometimes, the S's and the T's. And so I'm very particular about it. But when I learned how to go through speech therapy, I learned how to speak again. I learned how to talk. And in doing that, when I was 11 and 12 years old, I started redefining the way I spoke. And I started watching people on TV like Peter Jennings and Hewlett Perkins and Bill Bonds and all these people on television. And I admired them so much. And I would say, one day I'm going to be on that television and I'm going to be telling the news. I'm going to be telling the stories of this great city. Because, God, I love Detroit from the beginning of time. I always have. This is the best city in the world. I love it, even with its problems. Even with the problem. In fact, it's great because of its problems too, because we got solutions where those problems lie and have great people here. But I got to tell you something, the very thing that held me back ended up helping me in the future. And you know what that did? Not only do the glasses still remind me of that little kid, that little boy on that cable TV show, but also the speech impediment, it reminded me of something. What if other people out there need help speaking? And I'm not a speech therapist. But what if there's grown-ups out there, executives, who are afraid to do what I'm doing right now, which is to take up space on a stage and be comfortable? If I could do it, I knew they could too. So I started teaching executives how to tell stories. It's what I do on the side. And in doing that, it really inspired me about my own story, about the vulnerability I felt in those moments when I couldn't pronounce my S's and my T's. I thought, wow, if I couldn't pronounce my S's and my T's, and my name was Roop, and I had the bushy hair, and I was this short, and I was on television, of course you guys can go out on stage and do this, right? And we ended up making the story work. But I guess my point to you is, I want you to think to yourself, and don't answer it out loud, whatever that thing is that holds you back, maybe that is the very thing that can move you forward. And I mean that in the nicest of ways, because I think about introverts all the time. As loud as I am and as much as I speak on television, man, I like my quiet. And sometimes when I get into a crowd, I still feel quiet. And my agent told me, who's in New York, who's an agent to a lot of big anchors and reporters, he says, you got to work the room. You got to make sure you're loud and you're talking. And I thought to myself, man, what about these introverts out there? So Tony Robbins is going to get up on stage and tell everyone they have to be rah, rah, rah all the time. What if that's not who you are? What if the quiet in you is your strength? What if holding space and listening is better than talking? And so I started embracing that in the last 5-10 years. And I also embrace that in others. But I think if we all in society, in our country, in our auditoriums, in our communities, in Taylor and in Troy and in Clarkston where I live, what if in all those places we allowed people to be exactly who they are, without trying to change them and saying, honey, why are you so quiet? Or honey, what's wrong? Or don't cry, or you shouldn't be sad and you get too angry. What if we sat back and actually allowed people to be who they are? Man, if that was true and if that was possible, these glasses, they don't lie. I think we could all learn from that and teach each other how to be more us, be authentic. And if that is a guy named Roop Dog who happened to be on TV when he was 14 in Troy and ended up in New Orleans and beating the odds there, beating a speech impediment, standing up on stage in front of you, and what an honor it is. Maybe you can do that too, and I don't care how old you are, it is never too late. Thank you, my friends, for having me. What a pleasure and an honor with you guys. Thank you.